Everyone, welcome to CodeMiner 42 channel. And in this video, we're gonna talk about custom hooks and some issues that may arise when you're using custom hooks, maybe recklessly, so on and so forth. This is part two of our video, okay? And in this video, I'm gonna talk about some other concepts that might arise. I am your host, Yasmin Cristina, and let us start. Okay, so in this specific video, I'm going to talk about how to avoid unnecessary re-renders because sometimes when you use custom hooks in React, that might happen. Okay, so yes, in React, we have lots of components, right? And we use custom hooks inside those components. And custom hooks are all related to state. And when our state updates, we may end up with multiple re-renders. And in this video, we're going to talk about it in more depth. Okay, but before that, let me talk about my previous video a little bit. In that previous video of mine, I talked about custom hooks as well. This specific video here, custom hooks, possible issues. You don't need to have watched that one to watch this one, but it is cool if you do, because the subject, the topics are linked. In that one, I talked about state sharing. In this one, I'm gonna focus a lot more on the re-renders. So don't worry, you can still watch this video with no problems, but I do recommend you to check that other one out. Okay, now let's focus on our theme here. First, I will review some concepts that we mentioned in our previous video. Like, for example, our catalyst. We're going to use a very similar project in this video, a very similar project to the one that I mentioned in the previous one. And in the previous one, I talked about the custom hook called use catalyst. And use catalyst was used by two components, catalyst and totally different catalyst. In that video, we talked a little bit more about how those two components dealt with custom hooks. And specifically, we understood that custom hooks share logic, they don't share state, okay? And using that idea here, with that understood, we can dive into multiple re-renders because our small project here is also going to be related to a catalyst and it's also going to be related to our custom hook that we use there. Okay, so let's start. Let's remember what re-render is, okay? According to the amazing documentation from React, custom hooks, the code inside your custom hooks will rerun during every re-render of your component. When your state is updated, your components, the components that use that custom hook will update as well. So it's kind of a cycle, okay? So your custom hooks deal with state. And when your state is updated, your components that use your custom hooks will re-render as well. And sometimes that is not exactly what you want, okay? But how to deal with that? How to deal with that type of situation when multiple re-renders happen? Well, let's find out. Well, first we gotta remember how React behaves. So let's think more about how React deals with our DOM and how it updates. Okay, so the first step is when a trigger happens. A trigger happens in your component when it first needs to initialize. Okay, so your component needs to initially appear on the screen. The first initialization, and also the trigger also may happen when your component's state updates or its parent's state update, and that is called a trigger. In this case, this little waiter is passing what the client wanted to eat. Now, second one is rendering. Is pretty much when React calls our components. Our components are functions, and in this case, React is rendering them. And when React is rendering them, it is calling our component. In the component kitchen here, the component is in this case the card. And finally, we have committing. When React finally actually updates the chains, the DOM, and we see the updated version of our application on the screen, and the user is happy because he finally got what it wanted. That is React's behavior in a very general sense. It's not in depth, okay? But you can kind of understand here where I'm going with. Every time there is a trigger, your component is gonna re-render That means that your DOM is going to be updated, it's going to be changed. Okay, and that might be harmful for your application depending on if you are dealing with heavy data or not. Okay, so pay attention to that. And with that in mind, with React's behavior in mind, we should focus on something that the documentation also says, that the default behavior rendering all components within the updated component is not optimal for performance if the updated component is very high in the tree. Well, what does that even mean? What does that even mean? Like high in the tree, what does that mean? Well, high in the tree means that when your wrapper component is also dealing with state, all child components will also re-render if the state changes. And that might be harmful for many reasons because that might affect the performance in your application. So sometimes you don't want that, especially as I just mentioned, when you're dealing with heavy applications with lots of data and very consuming components. Okay. But, however, you should also remember that this is part of React's behavior. Okay. So sometimes it is necessary to re render. See that in this example here. The user wanted something else now. Now React needs to update that state. And then when it finally triggers and render the new state, the user is going to be happy because the user is able to get the most updated data that it wanted. So that is important because React needs to be dynamic. Our applications need to have the most updated data, right? So in this case, it is a good thing. However, sometimes it is unnecessary. Sometimes your re-renders happen in a more unnecessary manner, and you don't always want it to trigger a whole lot of re-renders all at once because that might affect your performance as we just seen here. So just keep in mind that re-rendering is important, but sometimes you need to understand when it is going to be used, when it should be used, when you should avoid it or not. Okay? But well, let's see it in practice then. I have a small project here that I want to share with you guys. It's our cat app. It's our cat app, and this is our cat app. And in this cat app of ours here, we have a cat list, and this application is very similar to the one that we've seen in the previous video. The difference here is that I have an add cat button and you have a light mode and dark mode switcher, a toggle here. So we toggle to dark mode and light mode, just like that. And to visualize change better, I added console.logs to each one of those components. So cat cards have console.logs indicating that it rendered. Our model as well has it. Our header has it as well. And with that experimentation, we're going to test if our custom hooks really trigger re-render, right? Let us see. Let's open DevTools here. And as you can see, we already had some console.logs here. But let's specifically try a new behavior. Like, for example, what if the user click on add cat, We know that our components rendered once, as you've seen when I cleared console here, because they appeared on the screen. But what happens when I change the state somehow? Just remember that in this case here, my model is using useModel, a custom hook that I will soon show you guys in the code. Therefore, this add cat is related to a state. Let's see what happens when I add a cat, when I open my model. Let us see. And yep, as you can see here, our console showed that lots of things re-rendered, right? And just a reminder, you can see duplications here because of React strict mode. Okay, so don't worry about that. It's just React strict mode being React strict mode. But the focus here is that our header re-rendered, our cat list re-rendered, and each one of our cat cards re-rendered as well. So even our header re-rendered, even though it has nothing to do directly to the model. And of course, we know that our model also rendered, but even so, that may not be the behavior that you want, right? Because most of our application very much re-rendered when we clicked this button, And of course, this is a small application, but that might not be ideal in many cases, especially if you're dealing with a heavy application. So how should we deal with that? Okay, let's go back to our slideshow and proceed our analysis. As we've seen, we saw it in practice. Here I have a GIF of what happened. We saw multiple re-renders happening only because I clicked on the model to open the model. You have lots of re-renders happening. Okay, that might be harmful because you have lots of re-renders happening because of one state update. But how should we deal with that? Well, there is a solution for that. There are many possible solutions actually, but let's see one that is specifically related to our header component. Let's see what happens when you click on light or dark version and see if that header component can hold our answer and solution for that. Well, let us see. So let's go back here in our application, open DevTools, and we see they have lots of re-renders here. Let's clean it up. Now zoom in a little bit for you guys to see better. And then I will change my theme to light mode. Let's see what happens. Okay, something definitely happened here. We see that yes, we had the re-render, but only the header component re-render here. And again, there is a duplication because of React strict mode. Don't forget about that. But notice how interesting this is because our header components also dealing with state. In this case, it's theme state, toggle theme, light and dark, so on and so forth. But every time I click it, I only re-render the header component. Why is that? Why are we seeing this type of behavior? Why? Well, let's see the implementation of our code. Here we have our code here in my branch initial console.logs. And in this branch here, I only have components with console.logs that I just mentioned to you guys. Let's see our app. And this is our app. And in our app, we can see here that we have our main content and you have Catalyst. Okay, that is our Catalyst right here. And you have a modal that is going to be open every time we click on this button here. And we finally have our header component. Let's see its implementation. Let's check it out. Okay. And here we have our heading component, our console.log statement. And you can see here that, hey, whoa, check it out. Our state's only gonna be changed and used here. We have use theme, that is a custom hook that updates its theme here. Simple theme, light and dark. And in this case, it also uses a context API in order to make the whole application know which version it is, light or dark. But the focus here is that since our header is the only one dealing with the state, then since header is the component that is the wrapper regarding the state use theme, then only our header component re-renders when we change its state. If we go back here, we see that header is being used here, it's being called here, but state's not exactly here, right? Interesting. So following the same idea, can we do the same kind of solution to deal with our modal and our button here that is triggering our multiple renders? Maybe, yes, something like that can be done. Let's switch branches here to another one that is gonna be called, modal wrapper. And it's a bit of a different one, okay? In this one, I call the component, the modal wrapper component. Let's see how it behaves and how different it is from our application. Let's go to modal wrapper here. And in our modal wrapper, we can see that I wrapped up my states. I componentized my state here, and only my button and my modal know of this state here that is used in my use modal. And I kind of dumped everything inside this use modal custom hook here. So in this case, you can see that I passed all the information that my modal needs, and I also add my button here, and I componentize the states. Therefore, now the application doesn't need to know of false or in true regarding to is modal visible or not. Well, this is the code. We saw the lines of code here. Let's see if it works in practice. Let's see if it solved our problem. Okay, so we have it. Let's change it. Okay, so let's see here. In this case, we open the model and oh, check it out. On the model we rendered, because now state is only unique to the model and the button. Therefore, you will only see re-renders regarding the model and the button. And when you close, same thing is gonna happen here because the state's only related to the model, the component. Super cool, right? It kind of made a solution. And it's something extremely easy to do because you just componentize the state. So as you can see, going back to our slideshow here, our header component only triggered the state change inside itself. Header component only re-rendered itself. So that is interesting because we understood that we need to apply the same implementation that we've seen there to our model. And when we finally did that change, we applied the solution. And by the way, if you want to check out this repository of mine, you are free to check it out in the links in the description that I provided. But we pretty much componentized the state, baked into pieces. And now we have a better separation of state. Now state's only related to the model. And that is kind of like piecing apart and trying to match, puzzle pieces, because now everything is way more separated. Because of that, it's easier to test and debug our application because when Modo has any kind of bug or problem, we will see and understand that it's only related to the model and the button that triggers the model. So everything is more separated, and we also have a better responsibilities separation. That is extremely useful. And in many cases, you can apply something similar to this kind of solution that we've seen here. Of course, we've seen it in a very simple manner, but you got what I meant. This is just an example for us to kind of understand what to do. Okay, now let's pay attention to some other things as well. We could do even better and optimize our application here. For example, as you can see, when we change light mode and dark mode, our header re-renders, right? There's also a new optimization, some other optimization that you can add here to make it even better. Let's say that your header component or a navbar component had like a search button or even a search input, has heavy data, even a crazy animation for the logo of your company. It fetches data from a very heavy and full API. But if all that happens and also it had a dark and light mode button. Maybe you didn't want to trigger all those re-renders inside your header component only because of dark light mode toggle. Well, there is another fix solution, optimization that you can do to make it better. And you can see that in another branch of mine that I have here. So let's go to our theme toggle button. And in this case, you're going to see something different here. As you can see, it had header before. And header had the button and the state right here. Now I created a new button called theme toggle button. I optimized even better our header. And now if I had many other things here in my header, I wouldn't see the re-render happening in the whole header, only inside my theme toggle button. Because in this case, it also has a render here because we console.log statement here because we're going to test it out soon in a few seconds. But just pay attention to the fact that now the change of state happens here in the button. We separated its responsibility a bit more. And now the previous one, the wrapper, the header, doesn't have that type of responsibility. So let's see if it worked here. So in this case, as you can see, model still works fine because we created a model wrapper. Now, what happens when we click on dark and light mode? Only theme toggle button re-renders. There's a duplication here because of strict mode, that's normal, but the focus point here is that we minimize its scope even better. even more. And now only this specific button here re-renders. My whole header, all my header, is not re-rendering. No, this is just a small case here, a small application, but just remember that there are some heavy applications out there with lots of data, and that might save you, like limiting state scope might save you from affecting your performance. Okay, now let's go back to our slideshow and finish our analysis, because there are some other things that you can talk about as well, like, for example, nested hooks and memoization. As you've seen here, I didn't talk about memoization that much, right? Because that is also related to some other problems custom hooks may arise. And in this case, I only wanted to focus on componentizing state in a way, limiting its scope. But I want to talk about it in a future video, or maybe you can already research about it on the React documentation and so on and so forth, to use memoization when you don't want to re-render or recreate variables or functions, so on and so forth. It's a very interesting subject to focus on. But in the future, I think it's important to focus more on nested hooks if you can. It is a very interesting subject because sometimes you have custom hooks that have other custom hooks inside of them, and there are many ways for you to deal with that. Not only that way that I mentioned here, limiting its scope, but some other possible solutions like memoization. And we're going to talk about React Memo in a future video as well, and positives and the downsides of using memoization. Because yes, memoization is pretty cool, pretty nice. Lots of people use it, but sometimes when used too much, it may also raise other types of problems. So you should pay attention to that. And I plan on talking about it eventually in a future video about custom hooks. And I thank you for watching, okay? Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We talk about a lot of interesting things here, and I think you're going to enjoy. And we also have a blog. Do you know that? The Miners, Code Miners 42's engineering blog. And by the way, I have a blog post there that talks about custom hooks in depth, and it's the blog post that introduce this whole presentation for you guys. So if you want to, you can check it out and comment below your doubts or some other questions that you may have. It's always interesting to participate in the community and so on and so forth. And like the video if you could. And that's pretty much it. You can find me on LinkedIn and GitHub. My handle there is Yasmin Casina. I'm a CodeMiner dev here, and see you soon in the next video. Bye bye.